Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. So today I wanted to ask a question that I recently got on a video where I discuss Hannon exercises, how it's not my favorite. And that question is, the commenter basically said, okay, so I get that Hannon isn't your favorite. Could you share what your favorite or favorites are and kind of give some input on that? So I wanted to answer this question, and I have a assortment of different technical exercises sitting here on the piano. Now, just because they're sitting here does not mean that they are my favorites. This is just, I have some examples because what I want to do is I want to answer this question by essentially saying that it's not what you play, it's how you play it. And I will come full circle on that because that's ultimately the most important point. So we're not going to stop the video here and say, there you go. I do have some input on some of these different technical exercises. So as a student, I was not brought up with technical exercises really at any point. I think one time I had my main teacher, my mentor, she gave me a Czerny exercise, etude, whatever you want to call it, to work on a particular aspect of technique. So it was like using rotation in a particular aspect. And of course, rotation is one of those technical movements or concepts that we kind of use almost a little bit all the time. So it was a very particular context where she wanted to develop this. So, but other than that, it's just been music. If you take, let's say this, a dozen a day, which I kind of like, and I'll talk about why. If you look at, a lot of these different things, they're just sort of stuff that you could work on in a piece of music. Here we have group number 3, number 2, and you have these, these double thirds, okay? Or number 3, climbing in place, you have this sort of a movement. Or number 4, we have repeated notes, etc. So those are all valuable things to develop. And if you say, I have a student that really wants to play this piece with repeated notes, but they've never touched repeated notes, this etude could be really good to have them work on. Or you, if you're self-learning, etc., that could be helpful to you. However, just saying, I'm going to work through all of these is not necessarily that beneficial. You could say, well, yeah, but I'm doing the same thing that you just said. I'm just kind of doing it all at once, not one at a time, depending on what I'm interested in doing, which is fine. You could do that. But that goes back to what I said. It's not what you play, it's how you play it. So you notice when I'm doing those double thirds, I'm sort of moving, I'm shifting my arm, I'm shaping, using my wrist, right? I'm not just simply using my fingers. So that's an example of it's not what you play, it's how you play it. Or the repeated notes. Repeated notes are not just simply, switching fingers, okay? It's important to use a little rotation, a little bit of in and out, etc. So if you don't know that, you could practice that etude and not really get much from it, okay? And that's the point that I really want to drive home. So I have a dozen a day here. I have the Schmidt Opus 16 preparatory exercises. I have the complete list technical exercises, and I have Hannon. And then I also have this Hannon Faber, the new virtuoso pianist. Talked about this, I think, in one video. This is basically, they have Hannon exercises where they have preliminary exercises where they really talk about what kind of gestures you're using to play the exercises and basically how to practice it. Again, it's not what you play, it's how you play it. And they talk about why they wrote this edition in the first place. They talk about how the modern piano is different, and so we have to approach it a little differently than Czerny may have. So they have, they kind of break it down into different sort of ideas. Gesture number 1, the swoop. Gesture number 2, the arc. Gesture number 3, around the corner. And then they kind of put it together. And then both hands together. 3 dimensions, no tensions. And so I really like that idea. Again, if I had to pick a favorite, here it is. Here's my recommendation. It would be the Hannon Faber. At least as a starting point, right? When I mentioned with a dozen a day, you know, I've actually never used this in my teaching, but this could be useful. I think that what I would do is I would have a student get it, and then we would just do certain little exercises to develop, you know, as they need to. Because if you're, for instance, wanting to play, you know, you're like, okay, I want to develop my repeated note technique. Picking a piece of music with repeated notes can be a pretty daunting task. You've never really done that before. And now you're going to play this complex piece of music that has repeated notes and all the challenges that come with it. Versus starting by understanding what the technique is. Understand the ins and outs, and then using a simple exercise like I demonstrated there to just work on that. First, I can start by just learning to switch my fingers, just sort of dropping up and down on each note. And as I do that, I'm going to kind of shift laterally, which is important because my fingers aren't all in a line, you know, like this way, right? So I have to be able to move this way. And then I can say, okay, now that that's comfortable in both hands, whatever, now I can sort of add a little bit of rotation. And I'm just kind of rolling like this a little bit because again, that motion is very, very natural. So combined with the lateral motion, a little rotation, and I kind of build it up from there. Now I can do that exercise really well. It's really comfortable. I can play it fast, and there's no tension. There's no fatigue at all. Now I can go to a repeated note piece that has a lot of those in it. That's a really, really good way to go. That's how I would approach technical exercises. It's important to note that, you know, when I talked about how I wasn't a fan of Hannon, the point that I'm trying to get across, again, essentially is it's not what you play, it's how you play it. People often have this mistaken idea that, okay, if I just practice this musical pattern or technical pattern, right? You know, I think that's the first one. You can tell I'm not very familiar with them. They think, well, if I just practice that, you know, and then it's, you know, my technique's just going to flourish, whatever. And I get these comments a lot. Well, you know, gosh, I can tell you that, you know, Hannon's been really helpful. I'm not saying it can't be helpful, but again, if a person practices Hannon and it works for them because, oh, guess what? They're using some rotation. They're not holding their arm in a stiff position and stretching between the fingers. I've heard teachers literally give that advice. That's what you want to do. No, that's exactly the wrong advice. That's going to cause problems. It's just unnatural. It's just, you know, not great. One person might get those things and they might just naturally do it, right? They just intuitively grasp that. But not everyone will. And so, you know, saying you should just go do this thing and hopefully you'll figure it out, I think that's really doing a disservice to your students or, you know, whoever you're giving advice to. So the point that I want to get across is that you have to think about it in a different way. There's nothing magical about those patterns. Those patterns lend themselves to good biomechanical playing, good movement very well, right? So as I do this, I can use lateral motion and rotation. I could also use a little circular gesture, which works really well. Helps with the leaps, helps keep the fingers more close together because I'm using larger arm motions. There's some rotation in there. And then I'm also using the fingers, the hand, wrist, and arm all together as a unit. So my fingers can be as active as I want them. So I'm building that kind of tactile feel with the fingers and having the finesse and the control that I need, but they're not isolated. I'm not stretching between the fingers. Everything's working together. And that's what the Hannon Faber edition does beautifully. So that's why I really like it. So Hannon Faber would be my first pick for someone. My next one would be a dozen a day because the author, I think, did a really good job of just kind of like isolating little technical challenges in really just short little things that you could just kind of very easily apply, good technique to, and they're just gonna help you learn to move around the keyboard well. Again, if you practice them correctly. In group 1 here, number 3, hopping is what it's called. They have double thirds, but they're supposed to be played staccato first. You can very easily learn to sort of shift the arm when you're lifting like that. So she starts with that, and then later, of course, there's legato thirds. And so that will lend itself to technique developing well, I think. However, again, it's important to not just leave it to chance, and that's what a lot of times people do with their technique. They just leave it to chance. So maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. And I think that's a mistake. I think that if you understand that it's all about the movement, then you have to know what the movements are and how they work. But then if you can apply that to what you're playing, then it's easy. It's not really difficult. Recently learned the Moskovsky Caprice Espagnol, Opus 36, I think. 37, Opus 37. There's a Opus 36 etude that I want to learn too. But anyway, I think I posted a little clip of me practicing it recently on the channel, and I'm gonna have to do a full performance soon. Gotta get it up to tempo, and of course it's summer now, so things are just busy. I haven't been practicing much lately, but there's a lot of those passages that initially you look at it and you're like, it looks hard. And then you start practicing it and you kind of, okay, figuring out how to move and what feels good. And you go, it's actually really easy. It just feels easy. And of course, the main challenge is going to be speed. And then as you kind of get it faster, you're like, oh, like it just comes down to building that coordination. And when you have it, then it works really well. And yes, there's going to be a limit. I'm not saying I'm the fastest player out there. Of course not. I'm not. But that being said, you solve those technical problems, you know how to apply good motion. And what I want to leave you with is this analogy, right? And I got this from Dr. John Mortensen, who teaches at Cedarville University. And I think it's Cedarville Music is the channel he posts stuff on. He has some really great videos on there. But he was talking about this idea, this is an old video of his, but he was talking about how people often ask him, like, well, what should I practice, right, if I want to develop my technique? And he's like, well, that's sort of like, let's say you have knee surgery, and you ask the knee surgeon, once you recover enough that you're supposed to start walking and strengthening your knee or whatever. Well, doc, where should I walk? The doctor would be like, I don't know, you could walk in the park, you could walk around your house, if you have a backyard, you could walk on the sidewalk. Like, it doesn't really matter in that sense, right? It sort of seems like a silly question. Well, of course, yes, there'd be a caveat. Well, I wouldn't go like hiking, especially like some really advanced hike or whatever you want to call it, like something that's challenging, right? You wouldn't take your grandma on that hike. I wouldn't do that, get things really strong and, first, but again, just go walk. It doesn't really matter. That's the analogy, right? It's not what you play, it's how you're playing it. You have to be smart about it. If you can't easily do, let's say a dozen a day book 1, like these are too technically hard for you, then you would be very foolish to jump into the list technical exercise. I'm gonna just do all these exercises, which I don't love, because instead of just taking common technical challenges from pieces of music and putting them in here, list, similar to like, I think the Brahms exercises, he kind of takes and has these kind of very fanciful exercises that are supposed to develop, independence of the fingers and all this kind of stuff, where it's almost impossible to find music that even requires those kinds of things. And what you actually find is that they actually don't. And that's what I like to say, is that find me a piece of music that requires that, and I'm talking about exercises where you have to hold all the fingers down and then only play one finger, like that. Find me a piece of music where it seems to require that, and I'll actually show you how it actually doesn't. You wouldn't play it like that, because that's unmusical. It's just like, it's unnatural. It's silly that we think we have to do these kinds of exercises. But so you have to know your limit, right? If you've never played, successive octaves, if you've never played successive octaves, then you probably shouldn't pick a piece of music that has a bunch of successive octaves, especially let's say in the left hand, right? So acquaint yourself with the technical challenges and then go from there. So you have to be smart about it. So recommendations, Hannon Faber, dozen a day. Those would be my top picks for those. But again, remember that it's not what you play, it's how you play. And you can always find someone that will just say, just go practice Hannon, practice your finger exercises, and you'll just build your technique. But ultimately, they either just had a really good teacher, whether they understood technique, they were able to communicate it in a way that this person just has flourishing technique, or they just sort of, intuitively grasped it, right? You have a lot of these people, these child prodigies that are like that. Most of us are not like that. We don't just intuit things like that. My wife is very intuitive about things that I'm not. And I'm very intuitive about things that she's not. She's always saying to me, because I do a lot of cooking, she's like, you'll take a recipe and you'll say, I want to change it. And she's like, and then it'll just turn out amazing. And she's like, how do you do that? It's like, I don't know. I'm just like, I'm not sure that mint is a good choice for this recipe, so I'll tweak it or something, right? We all have certain areas that are just, very natural, easy for us. And for some people, that's piano. And that's amazing and awesome, but you don't want to leave your technique up to chance. Those are my recommendations and my advice. I hope it was helpful. Hope you enjoyed it and learned something from it. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.